Yeah, you can go ahead now.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this series of lectures from the Cognitive Radio TCCN's Security Special Interest Group. The Special Interest Group was formed sometime, I think, in 2013 or 15, I'm the chair. I am Subha Subbalakshmi. I'm a professor at Stevens Institute of Technology, and Dola Saha from University of Albany and Charles Clancy from MITRE are the vice chairs. A very let me say this. Okay, very quickly to introduce the SEC ID, we are currently about 223 members. You can find us on the LinkedIn group. Since this is being recorded, I am not going to tell you where the links are. If you like to have any more information on the group or its activities, you can feel free to reach out to either me or Dola. We've been having monthly virtual seminar series going. The first one was by Professor Vinspor on November 17th, and we've got one by Kaushik Chaudhary from Northeastern, and then Rosu from Utah, and our current speaker is Professor Trappe from Rutgers. We've got a couple more slots filled for March and April, and we have a few more in the works for the upcoming months. So again, all these talks will be recorded, and you should be able to access the recordings at the SIG website. Here is how it looks, along with the abstract bio and all of the details. So quickly to introduce Professor Trappe, he is a professor at the Electrical and Computer Engineering Department at Rutgers. He's also the associate director of the WinLab. I'm sure everyone in this area knows WinLab. He has led several federally funded projects in the area of cybersecurity and communication systems, projects involving security, privacy for sensor networks, file layer security for wireless systems, security framework for cognitive radios, and the development of the orbit test bed and new RFID technologies. So he was the PI for the original DARPA Spectrum Challenge, in which teams battled for spectrum superiority on the orbit test bed. He has over 20 years of experience in network security and wireless areas, co-authored a popular textbook in security, Introduction to Cryptography with Coding Theory, as well as several monographs on wireless security, including securing wireless communications at the file layer and securing emerging communications, something there, and lower layer approaches. So he will be speaking about new risks facing wireless systems. So Professor Trappe, please take it away.
Okay, all right. Also, let me just go ahead and pull up my screen. And as I do this, all right, let me start by saying, if you look at all the other talks I've been given, all right, they have a particular flavor in offering solutions, all right? And I want you guys to think about how those solutions that they presented might be useful or might not be useful in addressing some of the problems that I'm going to identify here. This talk is kind of about a list of problems. It's kind of about a walk down memory lane. In fact, that's how I'm going to start. And it is not so much about researchy technical solutions. Certainly, if we want to do that type of thing, I could do that for you guys. But frankly, I enjoy the story more than all the math equations and so on. So let's take a little bit of time and go back down our memory lane and remember some of the old days. And well, I know some of you might not remember these days. Some of you are pretty young. But anyway, the old days of wireless were like this, all right? The cell phones were humongous, all right? You had to lift weights in order to be able to carry them. And as you got a little bit further on, we got cell phones like this, all right? You know, this old Nokia phone, all right? And You even had pagers, all right? This is like late 1980s, early 90s, all right? And that was how people, kept in touch. And I'll just take a quick second and say, you know what? You walk around a hospital, you'll still see a lot of people using these. A lot of doctors. That's kind of scary. Okay. Um, Old wireless also was basically your broadcast televisions. All right. Television broadcasting towers sending out wireless signals. All right. Shortwave radios, amateur radios, ham guys. All right. That was wireless. All right. This is, again, the way it used to be. And maybe as you got into the early 90s, you became aware of this wonderful advancement, all right, known as Wi-Fi, and you had one of these old Linksys routers, all right, like this is 802.11, all right, B, all right, and nothing more, not a G in there, all right. And so when you think about wireless and where we started from, all right, it's really clear that wireless was not meant to do what we now ask it to do. All right. We ask it to do quite a lot of stuff. And we're asking it to allow our kids to watch cat videos. All right. All right. Cute little cats. All right. Which I don't know if that's even justified from a bandwidth point of view. Lots and lots of social networks. All right. Ways in which we connect to each other without actually physically being connected to each other. All right. Lots of streaming video services. All right. We're all familiar with Netflix and Hulu and so on. All right. And more we're watching that on our mobile devices. All right. We're also asking that these wireless networks support us in some really dense environments. All right. Manhattan, or cities where the city planning is just one on top of the other, even more dense than that. Okay. Taking it further, wireless has become something that's really integrated with our physical world and how we interact with our physical world. And I really mean physical interaction. We're talking things like drones that are controlled through wireless communications. Drones record videos, send back videos, etc. All right. So now we're asking wireless to do this thing where we're asking it to control devices. All right. And take that even to a step further. We're asking wireless to provide the fabric by which we will have automated vehicles, self-driving cars, and so on, and that are going to communicate with each other, with the infrastructure, with the cloud, etc. All right, in some sort of hopes that we're going to improve fuel efficiency, reduce collisions, etc., etc., etc. All right, lots of great promises out there. But if you take all these type of applications and the requirements that they are presenting to us, all right, what you get here is something like this on the bottom left. We're asking them operate in an ultra dense deployment. We never asked that before. We're asking super reliability. All right, this is like, not a UDP level protocol thing. We're asking like, I want that packet, I want it for sure. All right, we're asking ultra low latency. It does you no good if you're trying to control a drone and you have 100% guaranteed delivery, but it takes 10 seconds for that communication to get there and back. All right. And we're asking high data rates. All right. How else are we going to watch the next generation of 3D cat videos or something? Okay. And sadly, the history of wireless communications, all right, sorry guys, I try to put a lot on one screen. But if you look at the history, we started from small scenarios where things kind of worked. All right. And now we've been adding more and more. And as we move towards these ultra dense deployments, we're pretty guaranteed for it to not work yet. All right. And that is the impetus for things like millimeter wave and other 5G type technologies. For me, all of these advancements really are a statement that we are leading towards what I would call a wireless ecosystem, all right? That is our future, all right? Wireless is everywhere. It is the fabric, all right? We're going to end up using all sorts of spectrum, all right? And whether I like it or not, we're going to claim spectrum from various organizations or societies that own spectrum, say, a medical community or a radio astronomy community or a radar community. We're going to put them under this envelope or not envelope, umbrella of figuring out dynamic spectrum access and so on so that we can all have as much spectrum as we want. But with that said, all right, and all these various applications we're talking about, the reality is that protecting this is going to be really hard. All right. So why is it going to be hard? All right. And the short version of the answer, now this is me putting on a network hat and not a wireless hat, but the short answer is we did not build our networks for the world that we're envisioning. All right. In fact, if you go back in history, there really was this battle of ATM style networks versus IP style networks. And one of those strategies won and the other disappeared into history. And the strategy that won was this IP structure of the network. It's also known as the narrow waist approach to building networks. Over here on the left, all right, you have a diagram of your narrow waist network design. You have your applications. They're separated through the magic of the TCP/IP layer, all right? No, the narrow waist, if you will. They're separated from the access technologies, all right? And that is how you actually access the internet, all right? And that led to a protocol stack that looks like this over here on the right, okay? So you can dig down and look at this all you want. It's the cartoon version of it. Thank you, Google and its image searches. But basically, bottom, you've got technologies like 802.11. At the top, you got technologies like HTTP, okay? This separation. And as a result of that, if you now go to the other world, swap on and put on a security hat, all right, and go through the past 20, 30 years of security development has kind of piecemeal followed protocol development. And we have security protocols that have been designed individually at each of the different layers. And this is not a complete picture, but I'm just going to start at the network layer. At network layer, you got IPsec for IP, all right? At the transport layer, you've got TLS, all right, for TCP, okay? You get the application layer, you have all these variety of different security suites, Kerberos key management, all right, secure mail, all right, PGP, etc. All right. Ultimately, my point here is you have all of these individual solutions for security that evolved from a framework where we separated applications, we kept them agnostic from the substrate that they were going to use. All right. And I guess I kind of already got to this punchline, which is, did you see anything missing? And the thing that you missed was wireless. There was wireless nowhere in that previous slide. And so I'm going to put this joke sort of as a posit out there, all right, position that our networks, they've been on way too much of a diet for what we're asking them to do, particularly what we're asking them to do in a secure future wireless world. All right. Starting with this narrow waist, all right, and you go back and you think of the prototypical application of the late 1980s, early 1990s, because once we put TCP in place, that's pretty much, we said we were going to stick down this road of development here. All right, oops, come back here. All right, we had an application like this thing up here on the upper left, and if you recognize this, give yourself a whole bunch of bonus points and also some pity because you just marked yourself as ancient like me. And frankly, that application couldn't care less how you were accessing it. all right, whether you were accessing it via Ethernet, all right, or something else. And in fact, you could nowadays, if you wanted to, no one would want to access this mail client using some wireless technology, all right? And again, the application didn't care. The kind of requirements and quality of service needed for it, it didn't matter to it how you were accessing it. But now, all right, give me a second here. I've got to move my screen over because I have you guys blocking my other side. All right, so now, all right, this is what we are talking about for the future. A future world where devices like cars are connecting to each other, to infrastructure, to cellular communications, to satellites, et cetera, coordinating, communicating, exchanging information, engaging in all sorts of stuff. And when you kind of think about the requirements of those applications, aka, oh, please don't crash into the car in front of me. Now the network underneath matters a lot more. Right? You need to know as an application builder a lot more information about what is available for you for your device. And I just saw something come up. Okay, all right. Yeah, and someone just did something in chat, happy smiley face. Okay, all right. So you are going to need, both as a wireless engineer, but also I will say as a security person, to understand the much more tightly connected relationship between the applications and the access technologies. All right. And so, where's my cartoon? In particular, that narrow waist needs to broaden, it needs to fatten. All right. And I don't mean let's keep TCP/IP. Maybe we do. I don't mean we throw it away. Maybe we do. Maybe we don't. What I do mean is really cross layer is a lot more essential. And by cross layer, we're really talking across all the layers because your application development is going to depend on knowing, all right, things like what you can expect from the network that you or some other device on your group interaction is depending upon. For example, and I'm going to just slam my local neighborhood, all right, I live in Princeton, New Jersey, and in spite of being the mecca for, one of the meccas for um, the development of cellular technology, frequently I get to see my wireless connection quality drop down from LTE all the way down to 2G or 3G sometimes. And that's because there are zones around me that just the towers don't hit, in spite of being in an ultra dense New Jersey area. So that type of information, all right, can greatly affect the type of applications that are relying on them. All right, so let me move on here. There are some other security issues that we need to be aware of, all right? And I will let you read through this slide, but I'll sort of point out the high, let's just say the most important ones, all right? And probably top of the list is, with wireless being everywhere, that means wireless devices are going to be everywhere. And they're going to come in all sorts of sizes, shapes, form factors, deployments, etc. We're going to deploy wireless sensors. We're going to deploy everything you can imagine. All right. And that means ubiquitous devices monitoring us. All right. Clearly, that should bring all sorts of privacy concerns. All right. And how you want to handle that is it's a deep question for us as a society. But just be aware that, the minute you leave your house and you get in your car is probably talking to something. And if you've got a secret rendezvous, all right, there's a good chance that someone's going to find out about that secret rendezvous. All right. Likewise, all right, this data which is being created, all right, it's being shared. All right. Where is it going? how accessible is it, etc. The highly distributed nature of our wireless devices also means that we're putting them in places where they're unprotected. All right. Sensors that monitor town square, anyone who walks through town square could do something to them. What does that mean? So there is a physical aspect to security for the future of wireless. That's not necessarily an academic paper type thing. It's just, hey, be aware of it. Also, these devices, as I mentioned, they come in all sorts of sizes, shapes, capabilities, and so on. All right, and that means we need to be aware of power energy constraints. We need to be aware of storage constraints, programmability constraints, etc. And I'll show you a little bit later how that can have very direct impacts on how security people think about securing wireless devices. And I would be remiss without saying there's going to be all sorts of new interfaces, things like mmWave, all right? And of course, the question then comes, how do those new types of interfaces, those new protocols or waveforms, how do they change things? All right. And I do not agree with the general statement that, well, it's mmWave, so therefore, the wavelength is smaller, the antennas are, the beams are more focused and so on. Therefore, it's going to be more secure and harder to eavesdrop upon. I will agree that generally, yes, that is generally true, but how many people here have actually built a Bluetooth gun, all right, and actually, used it from a kilometer away? Not many people. Wireless goes a long way, guys. Even, after it drops off 20 decibels, I can find some type of tool out there that has more than 20 decibels of gain to compensate. All right, so next, some chapters for you guys to think about. I like looking at stories and then using stories to guide, the thought. And so this chapter, the story is that the loop's going to guide how we secure things. All right, and by the loop, I really am talking about the control loop. All right, when we start thinking about cyber physical systems, all right, wireless is going to be essential to it. All right, and wireless is going to provide the data that is needed for those cyber physical systems, the data that's needed to establish those control loops. All right, and so all these smart systems like smart cars, etc. All right, really what they are about is data that's being shared either between cars or car to vehicle. Sorry, that didn't make sense. Vehicle to infrastructure or vehicle to cloud, etc. Lots and lots of data being shared to drive control loops. And this is just some generic PID controller here. It has nothing to do with cars. It's just generic. But you get what I mean. All right. We want to control things like braking so car A does not hit car B. And we need various data source data to be collected. And it's not, we're talking things beyond just the simple level of how far am I from the car in front of me, but it's also things like, hey, a previous car that drove through here recognized that the road coefficient of friction is lower, than it should be because, well, black ice or something. All that type of data would go into the super smart car adaptation algorithms that we are envisioning. And so to do that, you need data, all right? And so we have to somehow protect not just the data, but ensure the integrity of the data so that we can secure the loop, the control loop. And I like to use now not just cars, but drones as an example. And some of you might have heard me talk about this, that we did, this little thing that we did with some drones over here in my lab. But UAVs really change, in my opinion, the way we think about wireless. All right. They come in a wide variety of sizes and costs. All right. And if you go spend some time with Amazon, you'll see some really cheap ones. All right. And you'll see some medium expensive ones. And if you spend a lot more time, you can find some super expensive ones, but not on Amazon. All right. And we're talking about using them for things like environmental monitoring, um, you know, item delivery, maybe, if you believe Amazon, recreational purposes. Let me go see what my neighbors are doing. Um, we're also, you know, they're becoming more and more part of our daily life. Like people now hire photographers with specialties in drones to go and do a drone video of their weddings. Right, it's becoming prevalent. And now, moving on, they have a risk. All right, drones, they're flying. All right, if they fall, that hurts. Okay, physical harm to buildings, to people, to cars. All right. Now, if you think about them, and the fact that they are a control device, meaning you've got to sit there and you've got to fidget and control them. All right, then you need pretty strict performance guarantees for how you communicate with them. All right. If that communication link goes down, what's going to happen? All right. Um, Also, be aware that if they're broadcasting to you and you're broadcasting to them, all right, the fact that they have an elevated perspective, like they're up high, that could be a good thing. All right, because it changes let's just say it changes the multipath environment a little bit, all right, in their favor. All right. But at the other side, it could become a problem. And we'll see that a little bit later. All right. Um, I will also just highlight over here on the right that if you're getting one of these commercial semi-hobbyist ones, they now have really nice API software development kits for them. All right, and you can do some fantastic stuff. Just give them to your grad students, and they'll be happy, and you'll be happy with what they come up with. You'll probably be scared too. All right. So I started looking a little bit at drones because I was asked with part of our Homeland Security Center here at Rutgers to work with some organizations on protecting football stadiums. All right. And the problem here is that hobbyists like to fly their drones over football games. And in doing so, they don't have to pay entrance fees. All right. And so that has some revenue applications, particularly for the organizations that make the most revenue off of football. All right. Um, it also has a lot of safety and insurance implications because a crash of a drone into a building, a person, a player is quite serious. All right. And so what's happened is there has been this industry that's popped up of drone detection monitoring software that's being used by the facilities people at various professional and college football stadiums. And basically, for all of you wireless guys out here, this is really simple stuff. All right, someone's gone in and they program these devices, these monitors, to look for known MAC addresses of, these drone communications controllers and so on. All right, and so since many of them use some variation of 802.11 or even some Bluetooth or something, they just basically have a big network card that goes through, scans for known interfaces, and then reports them. All right, and then there's some you put a whole bunch of monitoring stations around the stadium, and whichever monitoring stations were able to see that MAC address, you go over there and you start looking. All right, that's pretty much the state of the art, a little bit better than that. All right. That works if there's wireless. I also point out, though, that these drones can be pre-programmed and commanded to go do things without, connection, so they can turn off their wireless, go record the game, and come back. All right, maybe it's only short snippets of 10 minutes at a time or something. All right. And before I go on to more technical things, I'll just say, honestly, this is a good example where technology people need to interact with the legal people, because the law seriously limits what we can do to counteract drones. All right. You can't disarm a drone. You can't go in and I don't know, wirelessly jam it or anything. There are some laws preventing us good guys from doing things against the bad guys. All right. And I won't get into too many arguments there. I'm just saying things are not easy and police departments are very frustrated along these lines. So here is, though, the punchline of my story, which is that it is really easy to take over drones. All right. And this is an example of something that we did a couple years ago here at WinLab. We wanted to see what would happen if we took over a drone, or first, if we could take over a drone. So we took one of our 3DR solo drones. All right, it's a midline, roughly $1,000 type drone. And we had a laptop. We were running Linux with it, and we ran, Wireshark and some other wireless exploit suites. And what we were able to do was capture packets going from the controller to the drone and then replaying them. All right. And we could do things like send it left, send it right. All right. And more interestingly, what we could do is we could create packets, messages, all right, that de-authenticated the drone from the controller. So now it became disassociated. And all right. And of course, you should wonder what's going to happen. All right. The drone now has no boss. All right. No master telling it what to do. Is it going to go plummet to the earth or not? All right. And this is if there's one part of my talk, this is the moral of the story. All right. The moral of the story is how we build our applications, which really isn't in the hands of wireless guys, but needs to be wireless aware and security aware, is critical. This drone, when we de-authenticated it, all right, it did not go crashing to the ground. It did not go flying randomly left or right. But what it did do was sit there and hover. All right. Yay, it hovered. It didn't go destroy anything. But eventually it ran out of battery, and then it came crashing down. Okay. So you had a safety period, but that's still not the right failure mechanism. Okay. So we should be much more aware, whether we're the wireless engineers or the people building on the wireless, on how we implement our fault conditions, given that we're asking so much of the wireless medium. All right. This here slide is a semi-technical slide in the sense that I really want you to take away the fact that as we deployed things like UAVs, we completely changed the wireless paradigm. We're now talking about UAVs flying around at elevated positions above the level of your cell tower, in fact. All right. And consequently, their RF footprint can be much broader, all right, than a terrestrial-based transmitter. All right. And that means you have larger physical layer interference. It also impacts things like MAC layers, all right, in the sense that carrier sensing, all right, might be more likely to want to associate to, to that drone because it is in a way in a better signal condition than some other device, all right? And as a result, because it has this bigger footprint, it also changes networking layer functions, all right? And in particular, because everything seems to be connected to or through, all right, this drone, all right, you've changed neighbor tables when it comes to things like ad hoc routing or mesh network routing and so on. All right. So there is good and there's bad. The good is that these UAVs are mobile, all right, and they've had some great applications as emergency base stations. All right, you can use them as repeaters to give you beyond line of sight communication. All right, but they have some bad. All right. Oh, and one of the bad, again, something that can be done, and I'm not saying that I have or have not done this, is you take an LTE dongle, all right, with open LTE, you put it on your drone and you fly it around, and you see whether or not other devices might associate with your drone and not with the legitimate LTE tower. And again, this is something that we can do experimentally because we run at WinLab, we run LTE as part of our test bed. So, all right. So I guess I just did say we did something like this. All right. Watching my time. The masses. All right. I'm going to go through this quickly. The other aspect of wireless that I'm really concerned about is the fact that we're talking about lots and lots of devices, and not all of them are going to be as hefty as my smartphone. All right, so on the left here, I've got like, the stats on a, well, old, but still, relevant Samsung S5. All right, it can run, let's say 10 hours on a battery charge, doing web browsing and stuff before you got to recharge it. My iPhone, all right, similar, okay? On the other hand, we are talking about lots of low-end devices whose function, all right, think of it like Internet of Things, but even the low end of the Internet of Things is just to monitor stuff, all right, and say, this thing is still where it is, it hasn't been moved, or inventory management, or a temperature monitoring, environmental monitoring, all right. These type of devices have really simple processors. They run at really low speeds. They have very little storage, all right, for data collection, and they have very little storage for programming, all right. And we're asking them to run on a really small coin cell battery or something, all right, for a time that's much longer than we were asking that smartphone. All right, and the problem here is the numbers are not in the works for those low-end devices. All right, and in spite of all the hype around green, I don't really believe too much in the idea that green communication is going to solve life's problems. It will help a little, all right, but in the end, energy harvesting and all that is not going to suddenly make this low-end device live and stuff better, all right? So moving on, I just leave you guys there with a point, which is we're not going to solve security problems entirely with green energy harvesting type solutions. And as an example, all right, I took a IoT device that we built here at WinLab, all right. It was built with a TI microcontroller, all right, and you can look at the chart to see, all right, its energy usage and so on. But basically, the majority of the energy usage came from radio transmission, a little bit of radio configuration, and so on. And that was to transmit a 14-byte packet that basically said the thing that it was monitoring was still within acceptable parameters, all right? The total amount of memory we had in order to program this thing, all right, allowed for about 20,000 operations, all right? And unfortunately, if you were to try to implement the lightest known TLS protocol stack, it takes 16 million operations. So there's no way a device like this, we're ever going to put an accepted security standard on it. And therefore, we really have to change how we think about securing these low-end new wireless devices. All right. I will skip through this real quickly. This is kind of cool. All right, but it's kind of, no, let me just, this is, I got to watch my time, but this is really cool. So I will tell you, we also need to keep track of our legacy devices that are out there. That old pager that I started with, well, guess what? Lots of doctors like this guy here, all right, are still walking around with them, all right? And it's because they don't really like changing technologies. And yes, there are better technologies out there. You just got to work on getting them to change. All right, but this guy was using, or not this guy specifically, all right, but they were using an old pager that used the flex paging protocol. All right, and what we did is we used the software radio. We went down to a New Jersey hospital, all right, whose name I will not mention. And we just collected data and used some publicly known GNU radio script that could decode this flex protocol. And we were able to collect all sorts of patient information that, frankly, we were not supposed to. And by the way, all this stuff here that I have presented, I went in and manually changed every single person's name to something random so that they would be safe. Okay. My point here is we also have to protect the old stuff and be aware of the consequences of wireless accessibility being everywhere. So moving on, I'm such a downer, right? Hopefully I've depressed you a little bit with what is going on, but I also want to give you some ideas for what we can do. And this part is not going to be too technical, all right? Because honestly, my number one suggestion is just think about the implications of security a little bit more. All right. I'm going to start though with just 3 planes. All right. And I don't mean like network layers, layers of a network, but just 3 things to think about. All right. One is at the device. All right. And at the device, we can use different forms of cryptography. All right. And try to at least perform some lightweight cryptography for these devices. All right. And I just, pulled out a couple of NSA's recent, like a couple years ago, lightweight cryptography implementations. Would these hold up to and compare well against AES or something? No. All right. But maybe, all right, given your operation limit count that you have on a low-end device, something like this might be the best thing that you could do from a crypto point of view. All right. I also think at the device, you should have some ways of checking to see the integrity of the device. So things like software attestation or looking to see if it's acting anomalous. All right. And that pushes some of the anomaly detection, which can't really be done on a low-end device, but using the network to detect bizarre anomalous behavior. All right. And so at the network level, all right, there are some other things you can do. All right. One thing is you can start using network caching to write out issues of disconnection. That doesn't work for a tight control loop like a vehicle, but maybe it does work for some other things where, you still have a connection to a device and it makes it easier for when that device comes back in that it gets reassociated, reconnected, and then downloads the rest of whatever it was using. It's the middleware layer, all right, that I think is particularly novel, all right, because we can really start thinking about how we can analyze all the various data sources we are creating, all right, just from managing wireless devices, managing these networks to look for outliers, all right? So running anomaly detection schemes, all right, or what I would call forensics is really essential, all right? That is going to be how we better protect things in the future, especially as we can't necessarily protect all the devices all the way down to the lowest crypto layer possible. And so now I'm going to shift and say, guys, that when I talk with people, I talk with 2 different types of people. There's I'll call them more professional guys, the guys who, your IT security guys, and I talk to the researchers. All right. And they're both kind of necessary, but I want to at least tackle each of them a little bit differently. For the professional person, all right, this is the guy who's responsible for keeping your academic network safe or whatever. All right. To me, that means you got to conduct a security audit. You got to do it a lot. All right. You got to identify all the stakeholders. All right. And understand your adversaries. All right. But maybe the better statement, and I didn't write it here. All right. But it is, I think, on the next slide. understand all your wireless signals. What are all the wireless signals coming out of your building or out of your workplace? All right. When you understand all the ones leaving, all right, and I'll connect you to like the hospital example. They had no idea that they're leaking wireless signals. All right. And they certainly had no idea that we were just sitting there running GNU radio out in the parking lot. Right. But someone else could, their IT guy should do that. Go out and just see, hey, what do I see? Let me take a whole bunch of things and see what I see. What wireless stuff is going out there? All right. That type of stuff needs to be done. On the research side, all right, I believe in stories about information flow, all right, where information goes from one agent to the next agent to the next agent. Understand these information flows and how they, how and why they go from one entity to another. All right. And as researchers, all right, look for solutions that haven't been done before. All right. And yes, I am saying go create more point solutions. All right. Develop new solutions for this problem XYZ. All right. Because if you address it, then some object or entity or agent ABC will be protected. And you go and you write some papers. I also will say that doesn't solve the world's problems, but we need it. We need those type of resources that when the researchers and the professional people begin to cross-pollinate and work with each other, we know, oh, this is how this can be addressed. And then, there's some discussion. All right. I'm also, now I'm going to talk about more pragmatic things. I am concerned that we've grown up also in a world where every organization, every company is a silo, all right? And organizations are being pushed to deploy the latest technology, all right? Those hospitals that we're using as examples, they are really pushed to keep on innovating, to have the latest MRI, the latest this, the latest that, all right? But the IT staff is not being pushed to have the latest protection mechanisms to protect the latest cool gadgets that they've gotten. And so we really have to think about ways in which we can support the fact that the IT people need to be able to span all of these different subgroups and stuff within a company, all right? And all the new things that they're getting and all the requirements and that imposes. And frankly, security is a hard problem, and it gets harder with the scale of your organization you're trying to protect. And as we move increasingly to cross technology, like Wi-Fi sharing with LTE, all right, and all these other cross technology solutions, we also now have made the whole security problem harder. So we have to think about that. All right. And so my recommendation again for the non-researchers out there is if you are a IT type person, go do an inventory of your of all the technologies that are in and around your place of work. All right. And in particular, scan spectrum, see what's out there. All right. And ask yourself, why do I see something at, I don't know, 900 megahertz? All right. I realize I have running low on time, so I'm just going to wrap up here and go to this, which is to say, if you're a researcher, all right, Cloudrans and all of the technology associated with Cloudrans, particularly the algorithm side, are pretty exciting because we're talking about collecting lots and lots of RF data, bringing it to some sort of repository where you can then analyze. All right. And that means you can start, inferring or understanding things and particularly anomaly detection and so on. And a great example that I've seen people working on is collecting a lot of sensor readings that were distributed geographically of the GPS quality measure, all right, coming off of your smartphone. So the GPS chip has a quality of the GPS signal, all right? And sending that to a database that could then follow and understand what's going on. And then you could see that, yes, the FedEx guy was using a GPS blocker and he was driving up and down the New Jersey Turnpike because we could see the holes begin to go. All right, that's something, all right, whether you call it Cloudrans, but I would just call it's a cloud data analysis problem, all right? That's where a lot of the future will be, is mass data analyzing to understand whether something's going wrong or right. And so I will leave that here, all right? And my last comment is just, we need to work on how we educate everyone. And so here I'll say that means we should understand threat models a little bit better, all right? Particularly the wireless people and not just the security people, all right? Understand the physical constraints. And then last, remember that humans are the guys and girls who are using these technology systems, and humans, they do some weird stuff and they do some stuff for some really not so smart reasons. All right. So I will stop there with my presentation and take some questions.
Thank you, Wade. It was really a nice overview of what we are going to face in the next upcoming few years, and that what we should really focus on as researchers. So I would ask at this point in time, if you have from the audience, if you have any questions, please feel free to post your questions in the chat window. And while we are waiting for audience, let me ask you just one more questions regarding this. So how do you think privacy and security can be modified or can be protected? Because when we are talking about security, a lot of the time we are not talking about privacy. And when we have access to wireless broadcast channel, a lot of the privacy issues are also gone. For example, you just showed that you had to modify the names by changing them by hand, right? So those are out there. So can you talk a little bit about security and privacy together?
Okay, yeah. So let me start by saying a little bit of security can go a long way in protecting some basic privacy. All right. In the case of that situation where we were outside of a hospital and we happened to pick up unencrypted flex communications, all right, the solution is easy. All right. And in fact, I did skip this one slide where I said, you can stop 90% of the problems with only 10% of the work. All right. The solution is tell all the dinosaur doctors to stop using dinosaur pagers. If you still want a pager, use one that actually uses encryption. All right. And they exist. All right. And they're still like, I'll joke, still 1995 level technology. Okay. The fact that it's like you don't use Telnet anymore. All right. You're smart enough not to use Telnet. You'll use some SSH shell Telnet thing. All right. That's simple. All right. And if we can get people to do that, all right, I wouldn't have had to do anything because I wouldn't have been able to see anything. All right. So start with some basic IT level, understand all the signals going out and make certain each of them has some layer of encryption. All right. Next, VPNs. All right. Always have, pretty much always have a VPN. All right. And that's not solving all of life's problems, but it is a layer. All right. As for privacy and so on, we will be giving up privacy. All right. A world where we are constantly monitored. All right. We will give up privacy. And in giving up privacy, that also means we're giving up security. Just we are not really sure whether to call it security or privacy. But again, like my car company knows that I drive my, because I've got, some car connect service. They know where my kids go to school. They didn't have to look it up. They know because I drive them there every morning. All right. So they know it within a GPS error bar. Okay. And so some of that we also have to understand and be comfortable with as a society. Or we also need education that says, I'm not comfortable with, Ford knowing that my kids go to this school, therefore I will, turn off that service. But again, most of us, we're not going to think that way. I hope that answered a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Here is one question. On the same note, and this comes from Andrinal Barreto. On the same note, the forensics approach will need the collection of lots of data. Wouldn't this itself create new privacy issues?
Yes. So I find this a very fascinating question because I've been on numerous defense projects where we talked about needing to go collect RF data out there in the environment. And we shut ourselves down. We, meaning the Department of Defense, said no, because we don't want to, have any issues with the privacy of our citizens. And so like the experiment you would want to do, the ideal experiment, we were prevented from doing. On the other hand, and I won't say it officially, but in order for these cellular providers to do all the various magical things that they do, that they are collecting lots and lots and lots of data. Okay. So in a way, yes, data, the collection of data by new third parties that are going to try to help us be more secure, that could be a problem. But the fact is, there is data that's already being collected, and lots of it. All right. And so maybe do we trust those guys? And I'll say the Verizons, the AT&Ts, or what, wherever, do we trust them to be our security forensics guys? Because they are the ones who have pretty much a lot of data that they could do some stuff with. All right. So that said, Andre, I would also add, there's been lots of talk about data scrubbing and all sorts of other stuff. I don't have an answer there. All right. I mean, I'm familiar with the privacy enhancement literature, but to me, it seems like when I collect the data, you also still have to trust me that I'm going to apply this privacy filter. All right. And not keep another copy of the data that I just scrubbed clean. Somewhere in there, that problem really begins to break down. Again, I didn't really answer your question, but it is a huge problem.
So I guess I'll do a quick last question, follow up on this one. So we seem to, as researchers, we're kind of stuck in this place where we don't get access to all of the data that the private sector is gathering. So what kind of solutions do we have as people who are not in private sector to push the boundary forward on these things?
The best solution I can think of is basically it's these test beds that are out there. All right. Because supposedly they're supposed to make us share data. All right. Better and easier.
Yeah.
Or at least they allow you to do the experiments that you want better and easier. That said, the real type of data we want is huge. All right. And, running orbit and stuff, I know we don't want to collect that much data. We also are worried about being sued, but we also don't want to collect that much and store it. Okay. And in a way, there's this, I'm trying to find a polite way of saying it. I'll just say it directly. Us wireless researchers, we're in a hard situation compared to other communities like medical communities and so on, where they're actually being encouraged before their papers are accepted. You got to share your clinical data or something along those lines.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, they too have up to a limit where this clinical data can't be shared. All right. But there's a lot of that type of issue where there is data, we wish it could be shared, but they won't share it because that data has value to those companies. All right. So we, the academic world, we want to run some experiments, but then we become liable for if I can, do some personal identification of people. So what do we do? And maybe the answer is we go borrow, I'm blanking here, but there's this site in Idaho where like they have,
Yeah, INL.
right. And you just say, I'm going to run a fake town for a week and just do all sorts of experiments like that. But of course, DARPA did that once and it was super expensive. And, but that's maybe all we could do.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Wade.
Well, thank you. And if there are questions, feel free to write me. I don't necessarily have all the answers. I like to instead think that I have lots of questions. All right. And you guys have the answers. So.
Since you have a hard stop at 11, I think that we can stop here. And I would really like to thank you for coming over, giving this wonderful talk. And I do see one question. I would say that please feel free to reach out to Professor Trappe, and then because he has a very hard stop at 11. So I would really thank you and appreciate your time for this wonderful talk.
All right, and actually, so real quickly, I just saw this question pop up. All right, I'll answer it before I go.
Awesome.
On my last slide, I said, don't write papers about attacks, basically. That's the problem with the security community. There are way too many papers about that people go out writing and publishing. I have attacked this system. I've hacked it. Here's what I did. And it was kind of cool for the first couple years when academics were doing it. But now, like, you already know ahead of time that you're going to be able to hack the thing. What you should do is contact the company that builds that thing and say, hey, here's a issue with your device. All right, rather than get a paper publication. Because honestly, a lot of these paper publications, the result is already known. You're going to be able to hack a system. All right. If you've been to any of these, DEF CON conferences, hackings, I mean, there's thousands of hackings every year. I don't know if it's really high quality publication. It is cool. All right. But we can help society more by going directly to the people and telling them, hey, here's a problem that you need to fix. But again, that's my opinion. It's not necessarily everyone's. Okay.
Great. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
All right. Bye-bye, guys.
Thanks, Wade. Bye.
Bye.